everybody. Now it's time to show you the tires I chose for the rims. Now with the tires, I had to also do some calculations. Not only did I have to work with trying to figure out the backspacing for the rim to ensure that it fits in the wheel well, but I also had to take into consideration that the tire is going to add to the rim's width, and that will eventually either make or break your setup as far as figuring out the correct backspacing. So now, below this video you're going to see two links to the calculators I mostly use to try to figure out the sizes I would have liked for my tires. Now, even with all the effort you may put into trying to figure out the correct size using those calculators, it will never show you what the tire will actually end up being as far as width. Now that's what happened with me when I was choosing tires. I went through all the trouble in trying to figure out calculations, but when I actually saw the tire was actually different in measurements than the ones that show on the calculator. So keep that in mind when you're calculating these tires. Now here are the tires. Now the tires I chose as far as brand, I chose Goodyear Eagle GTs. The size that I ended up going with was 255/40/18. And so the first thing I wanted to point out is the size 255, the actual number 255, that's actually the width of the tire. So when I went with the calculator, I got that the tire would be 10 inches wide, and so therefore I chose that. I didn't care about the center number, I didn't care about the 40. The only thing I cared about was I wanted it 10 inches wide and I wanted it 26 inches high, because the 26 inch is what is needed for the speedometer to be correct. So as close as 26 I can get, the better in accuracy my speedometer would become. So the calculator calculated this to be 26 inches high, and that's in fact true. It is 26 inches high. But the calculation for the width is not true, and this is where problems start arising. The actual tire is different than what the calculator showed. This tire from edge to edge is actually 11 inches wide. Now that could create a problem. So I'm going to be taking you for the ride and showing you the actual process of me installing the tires on the car and checking to see the clearances I ended up with for this tire. So here it is, rim and tire installed on the car, and I got the car jacked up on the axle, so the car is pretty much standing on its weight as far as the axle goes, and I also pushed down on the rear bumper so I get maximum compression, so that I can definitely, you know, check out my measurements with the complete accuracy. So initially I'm very happy. When I take my 2.5 foot level and I put it up against the let's get a light so that you can hopefully get a good visual of this. It's kind of hard because, okay, take my 2.5 foot level and put it up against the tire. You can see I have a good inch. Now I did measure, and I can't measure while holding the level and the camera at the same time, but the measurement is 1 inch away from the quarter panel lip. So that right there is beautiful. I'm very happy with that. So I know that it works out in that respect. And now the big question is, how does it look in the back? Now bear in mind, I installed it with one nut, okay, so it's flat up against the disc brake. I am not using any spacers. I wanted to see how it fits without spacers first, and if I needed to add spacers, I had my washers already. See, I have a whole bunch of washers just to calculate how much of a spacer I needed, but I'm doing this without a spacer, and so far so good. Okay, now I'm going to lay down under the car and try to get a good visual of this side. of the suspension. Okay, so I have my light in place. Let's just adjust it to reduce the amount of glare. And there's the clearance between the shock and the wheel. And when I measured, that was a good 3/4 of an inch. So I'm very, very happy with that. 3/4 of an inch away. And you can see how the shock kind of angles up, so that also helps with the clearance. The bottom of the shock, all clear. And let me go on the other side so we could check out the wheel well on wall against the tire fitment. Okay, so now here's the back wall. I don't know if you can see that. Just trying to get a better visual. And you can see the clearance. Very happy with the clearance. 3/4 of an inch. That's plenty, and that's with the suspension compressed on its own weight. So we have definitely clearance there. So I'm going to decide not to put any spacers because I have good amount of clearance. I won't know how it reacts until I drive the car, but from the looks of it, I look like I'm good to go. So that came out to be a complete success. And let's go over to the other side. Okay, so we're on the other side, and the same thing. No spacers in between the disc brake and the rim, and my 2.5 foot level. And again, I have a good 1 inch of clearance between the tire face and the fender wheel well, this quarter panel. So now, looking under the car, okay, let's get some light in here. So there's, and the light's not cooperating. So there's the clearance, if you can kind of see that without all this glare. There's the clearance on there. Now on this side is slightly less. The Novas, they're pretty famous for having axles that are not exactly centered. So I have just a little bit less clearance in there. I would say about 5/8 of an inch. So I could put a spacer on this side, an 1/8 inch of spacer, if they make an 1/8 inch, just to even it out. So not sure if I want to do that, but as of right now, I have clearance with the shock, and I do have clearance for the wheel well. So it's looking good. And again, I'll definitely make the final call when I drive the car, and if there's any rubbing, then I make the decision. Because as you can see over here, I definitely have some space here. So if I wanted to spend my money and get a spacer, I have a whole inch to play with to bring this tire out. And I still get to keep my big fatness. I'm so happy with that. So I render this whole project with the back tire a complete success. I'm very, very happy with it. Well, I took off the rim, and now you can see the studs, how long they stick out away from the disc brake. I will have to cut these down. So these are the nuts that I'm going to be using, and this is the stock length of the original threads that was on this disc brake. And so when I did my research on how many threads is needed for safety, for the minimum you need is at least 10 turns of the nut. So I wanted to see how many turns does it take for me to put this into the nut here, and I got 15 turns, almost 16 turns. So now if you look at how it actually, of it inside, I still have just a little bit space. I can probably get 18 turns maximum in this nut, this wheel nut. So I took into consideration the 18 turns that is needed, and I measured from the face to the rim seat, and that came out to 1 3/8 inch. So all these studs will be 1 3/8 inch, and I will have roughly probably 18 turns before this thing locks on tight to the wheel. Now the reason why that's important is if I was to decide to do a spacer, and I've already cut these down, there's no going back. I can't elongate this. So I wanted to get the maximum amount of threads possible to get this thing to lock down, so that in the event that I was to ever put a spacer, which on this side I don't think I have to do it, most likely on the other side, but if I was to ever put a spacer on here, I would have plenty of turns to lock this thing down. I need at least 10 turns, and even if I was to add a spacer, I still get at least 10 turns because I start out with 18 turns with no spacer. So that's what I gotta do. I gotta cut them down and get them all ready. So there, I'm very, very happy with the rears. The rears fit, and I'm done with that part, which I thought would be the hardest. The next video that you will see, which will be part 2, will be on the front tires. Now the front tires I thought would be easy, but on the contrary, it was actually a hassle. The fronts I did have slight problems with, and I will be showing that in the next video. So I hope you enjoyed the first part, which is the rear tires, which I decided to make this into 2 parts because most people are when they're doing something like this, like a muscle car, and in this case the Nova, most people would be most interested in getting a nice big fat tire on the back, and I'm one of those people that actually wanted the same thing. So I thought it would be pretty informative if I just show you what I did for the rears in one video, and then I just show you the fronts in another video, because the fronts is usually not a hassle. The fronts, people don't really worry about trying to get a big fat tire in the front. They're really mostly worried about getting a big fat tire in the back, and big fat tires cause big fat headaches. So I hope you enjoyed. Thank you very much for watching.